Okay. Did you get the last part? Oh, that's all right. Well, back to this. We looked at Gainsborough again. We have it from the last lecture. If Gainsborough was too far out there, what could they make of this? There is no historia. There's no drama going on. There is no ideal. That's what the world really looks like. It's not even sublime, which was permitted. You had enormous avalanches and things like that, or sea in a tempest, and that was sublime. It was frightening. Turner did those. It's not even sublime. And remember, this is hard for us to remember. That, to them, is not what it is to us. To us, this is a painting of nature, right? To them, it is a painting of the everyday world. So this is a fantastically important idea to get in your head. When you're looking at Impressionist paintings later, try to figure out why nobody would buy these things. That is not a painting of nature. That's what everybody saw when they walked out the door in the morning. You do not have the first industrial city. This is 1819. You do not have London becoming the first industrial city, the first megalopolis, for another 30 years. Sit down with me. You don't have it for another 30 years. And people said, that's what I see when I walk out the door. John Cage was asked questions like that, and he said, you know, these are just ordinary noises. And Cage said, yes, but you won't listen to them. I make you listen to them. Constable makes them look at their everyday world. It's easier for us to appreciate it because it no longer is. Now that nature is kept on a reservation like in India, and we have to take trips to it on the weekend. Now, it's hard for us to believe that landscapes, and again, don't look at me, just look at this. You'll start to see things in it. It'll become much more three-dimensional. The tremendous silence has something to do with all that water without a single wave on it. The dog hearing something that the man has not heard. There are little cues that we, as experienced human beings, pick up on. When you come in tight on it, you'll see this is a man plowing in very, very HD pictures of it. And down here, apparently sheep. And it just goes on and on and on forever. Half of it's clouds. Now, if you think about it, if you crossed this out and just did that, you'd have a pretty good 1950s abstract expressionist painting. And that's actually where it comes from. It's hard for us to believe that people had never done landscapes. The word doesn't come into English until about the time he's born. And they're not sure what they're going to do. They take it from Dutch, land shape, apparently, the shape of the land. For a while, the normal way of referring to it is landskip, S-K-I-P, landskip. I wish to go, Gainsborough says, I wish to go off and paint landscapes. Finally, it settles down to landscape. There had been pictures which were like topographical, like view of East Bergholt, Suffolk, or something like that. They were usually tiny. Ladies did little watercolors of their backyards, like postcards. And some of the paintings which we love today, which the Dutch did, if you look more closely at them, they're not actually about landscapes, they're about life among the lowly, peasants doing crazy things. There's really a beautiful landscape in the De Young Museum. It looks like a forest and fields and a hunting scene. And then you get the joke. right in the center of the thing, quite tiny. You'll notice the hunter is looking back. Imagine him looking back, right in the center of the thing, quite tiny. The dog is squatting down and pooping. And it's a gag. I mean, yes, this is a scene of funny hunting life. Imagine what it would do to the scene if you had the dog pooping in the foreground there. It would destroy the mystic beauty of it, at least for me. No, he's painting this thing seriously. And not only that, he always talks about it religiously, and that annoys everyone. He says contemplation of the everyday world, if you really do it, meditate, will evoke an emotion that leads you to God. There were atheists like Wordsworth who wanted you to do this because you had lost the paradise by that point, after the age of reason, that you thought you were going to get in the next life. But there were also Christians like Constable and Hopkins who wanted you to do this, saying, once you get your mind out of the way and just look at what's out there, God speaks to you. You get a feeling of goodness and content, like effects from like causes. God can't be a spider if, when we contemplate his creation, we feel this calm, this goodness. And again, it's training you to be able to do that in your own life, even without trying. Within 72 hours, many of you here will have a recurrence of the mystic experience, of the aesthetic experience. You'll be sitting somewhere, you know my story, sitting there at the bus stop, waiting for your boyfriend to come pick you up, and usually you'll be annoyed doing that. And you'll just be sitting there calmly, watching the mist, watching the fog and the street lights. You'll even think to yourself, wow, I'm in a good mood today. You won't be thinking of this. It'll just happen. It'll recur. Later you'll think, was it because of that stupid class? Or that, stuff we did in the museum? Yes, yes it was. The great defense of this kind of art is that it works. Osmington Village. Now let's come. Maria Bicknell, whom he married. He himself was a good-looking guy. His father was a miller, and he was a big, strapping guy. He went off to art school. His father paid for it. They were prosperous. And then he quit and came home, because Sir Joshua Reynolds had him looking at busts of, they didn't paint real people, they painted plaster copies of ideal art. So you could get used to ideal art. And then when you went into the real world, you would notice all the imperfections in the real people around you, and you would be able to just pick the perfect features and compose the ideal. He hated that. He wrote a letter to his friend Dunthorne in 1802 when he left school, and he said, "For these few weeks past, I believe I have thought more seriously on my profession." Well, I'll come back to Maria, but let me give you one here. Here. One of his big 6 canal scenes. And he said, painted later, "For these few weeks past, I believe I have thought more seriously on my profession than at any other time of my life. That is, which is the surest way to real excellence." He had just come from seeing some pictures that a wealthy landowner who dabbled in art owned, Sir George Beaumont, and he wanted to go back to the real world. And he says, talking about art school, "For these 2 years past, I've been running after pictures and seeking the truth at second hand. I shall shortly return to Bergholt, where I shall make some laborious studies from nature. A pure and unaffected representation of the scenes may employ me with respect to color particularly. There is room enough for a natural painter. He has just forecast in this 1802 letter the next 170 years of art. 1. Abandon the academic method. Stop copying art objects. Go out into nature. Study nature. 2. He turns against the ideal. The hell with pictures. That's truth at second hand. I'm going to do laborious studies from nature. 3. Your everyday world, mere, and this is, of course it's awfully cute and picturesque to us, but remember, this is every day. Mere real scenes, pure and unaffected. And 4, attention to color particularly. And that will be one of his great contributions. And then, I don't know if it was sarcastic, he quoted Reynolds. He said, there's no easy way of becoming a good painter. It can only be obtained by long contemplation and incessant labor. It's one of the paradoxes. He liked Reynolds as a person and was fond of him. Maria Bicknell. In romantic stories about artists, the artistic rebel has to live as a martyr to his art for just the first 20 minutes of the movie, or maybe 30. And it's all very dramatic and exciting, being a martyr to your art. The newspapers blast him, he's controversial, people in cafes say, there goes that fool Van Gogh, or something like that. People argue over him, what do you think of Monet's theories? Oh, he's mad. That's the Hollywood version. And then, in the second part of the movie, bingo, he's a hero. That's not real life, not the real history. In real life, the martyrdom of the avant-garde means living in obscurity for a long time. It means not being able to marry the woman you're in love with until you're 40 years old. It means being mocked or pitied by your family as a harmless fuck-up at best. It means accepting money from home, living in Brooklyn, and pretending that's cool, shopping at Goodwill and saying you're buying vintage clothing. You're buying stuff people threw away. Unable to get your life started. I see sad looks on faces here. I'm sorry, I didn't realize this was going to come home. It's just plain dreary. In 1809, Constable fell in love with the beautiful Maria. Both her parents and his parents refused to let the match go on and discouraged him. Because they tell him, you and your damn landscapes, which he's been painting for 7 years now, you'll always be broke. Portraits, that's where the money is. Like this. This is a portrait he did of a lady in her favorite hat. That's where the money is. His mother has a letter like that. If you wish to obtain the object of your desires, she means Maria, you must paint portraits. Well, he can paint portraits of painting customers. Look, she would have enjoyed seeing her favorite dress and her favorite hat, and undoubtedly it's an almost photographic likeness. He didn't idealize her, he didn't make her beautiful the way Reynolds would have. But he won't do it. He won't do it. And he has a miserable time of it. It's very hard for us to understand how they could look at this but to them, this was a workaday scene. This isn't nature, in fact. Well, first of all, look at that little runoff stream. Let me just get my finger there. On the side here, you can see the slime of the waters, the rotting posts. He said, rotting wood, slimy water, these things have made a painter out of me. I grew up on the marshes in Long Island before they were knocked down and houses were put on them. And the smell of marsh at low tide is just like home to me. The reeds and the wet black mud. I remember pulling over to the side of the road with my friend Jerry and saying, "Do you smell that? Do you smell that?" And after a while, Jerry said, "Look, you grew up with this. To the rest of us, it stinks. Let's get out of here." This is a canal. It is not a river. The Stour had been canalized over 100 years before, in 1628. To cut, Arnold Spencer got a patent to cut and make locks, sluices, bridges, cuts, dams, and other inventions. Canals were big business. The roads were awful. They were mud most of the year. Do you remember in Tom Jones when the horses run away and the roads that they walk on are just mud ruts? Anyway, a horse can pull much more if it's floating on a river. Now, do you see what's going on here? This is all real life. You've got a towpath here. You've got a towpath here, right? Here's the horse. Here's the adorable little boy. And the horse is pulling this gigantic barge with some help from this guy, poling it. This here is a lock. Have any of you ever been on a canal? Probably not. This is a lock. What a canal is taking a river and turning it into like a series of bathtubs that empty into each other so that there's no current at all. I'll explain. The point is that this horse could carry, I think it was 250 pounds on his back. 250 pounds of grain, 250 pounds of coal. You're going to need a person, and you're going to need a horse, and you can imagine what that does to the price. Do you see how huge that damn barge is? The same horse can pull a barge on a canal that weighs 50 tons. Wow. When the canals come in, the price of coal drops so that even peasants now can stay warm in the winter. The price of clothing, the price of everything. Canals are very big business. They're also high tech. What happens is here, higher up on the river, instead of the river just like that, current, the river hits a wall here. And there's this empty space. They open the door on that side and put this is kind of a wall, and put the barge floats in, right? Then they close the door in the back. And slowly they drain the water out, and the barge goes down. Then they open the door, and the barge continues. No current. The whole river is chopped up like that. No current. You've had the experience, haven't you? You see the way water displaces. When you were boating, or maybe down at the park, two friends could be standing in a rowboat that you rented, and you could easily pull them both with one hand. What would happen if they were standing in a little red wagon or something? Would you pull your two friends? No. See, the water displaces the weight. So this was a tremendous invention, the canal. In New York, the Erie Canal that connected the Atlantic, went up to Albany and went over to Buffalo, connected the Atlantic with the Great Lakes. Wow. The railroads didn't come in until the 1840s. The canals were still the big money well into the 1870s. So when people looked at it, it certainly wasn't nature. It was a technically familiar scene of working people, not exactly peasants, but working people on the canal. And he does many scenes of people building boats, people repairing boats. Let's see. Nobody wanted it. The White Horse. This is one of his most famous. This is a moment when the towpath continues on the other side of the river, which has been canalized like that. And it all still, by the way, when you go to England, when you take that tour, it still looks exactly like this. The way in Florence, Italy, nobody's allowed to build a skyscraper, it's all been preserved. It's beautiful. You're riding and walking in between constables. Even if there's a light rain, it's almost more beautiful. And the horse is being taken over to the other side where the towpath was. Look at the sky, the reflections. Nobody wanted it. He has a best friend, John Fisher, whose father was a clergyman of the bishop. And Fisher bought it, finally, so somebody would, in 1826. People were trying to get him jobs. These stories are so sad they're almost funny. For instance, there was a fellow, a general, General F. Slater Ribaud, in 1817. Probably Fisher managed to get the general to hire Constable to paint a picture of his house. I think if you stare closely, you can see the house in the distance. Mostly what you see are cows, which are even larger than the house. The general, of course, refused the picture, probably in some wrath. And they negotiated with him, not Constable, but somebody else. And they said, look, he's showing how much land you own. To which the general replied, but he didn't show all my land. My land actually goes further. The original picture stopped like there, okay? So they said, what if he glues a strip of canvas onto the side and continues so that he's got all your land? And the general said, all right. So there's a strip of canvas glued onto the side of this so that the guy shows his entire property. This is almost the typical Constable experience. He won't do it. Just like he won't paint the damn portraits. This is what he wants to paint. And this is the painting which stuns France and eventually triggers Impressionism. It's called the Hay Wain, W-A-I-N. Wain is a very old-fashioned word for wagon, just the hay wagon. He painted it next to a very familiar scene for him. You see that house on the left? An old man lived there named Willie Lott, L-O-T-T. Willie Lott boasted that he had never been over the horizon in his life. Constable loved that you could just find your whole world here. He said, the English, like the Dutch, are a stay-at-home people, Constable said. See Willie Lott's dog here? That damn dog, excuse me, Rocky, pops up in so many pictures that eventually you just wonder. Anyway, the hay wagon here, not a particularly good slide of it. but it's a hot day. The color is almost bleached out of the landscape. There's all, look at the reflections on the water. It's steamy. Fisher, I mentioned, was the nephew of the bishop of Salisbury Cathedral. That magnificent cathedral is where you're going to go on that day trip. And there's a copy, it looks just like that, and the whole grounds have been preserved. And there is one of the original copies of the Magna Carta there, one of the few. Well, Fisher managed to get the bishop to agree to pay for a picture of Salisbury Cathedral. That is the bishop there pointing with his stick at Salisbury Cathedral. Imagine the bishop's surprise when Salisbury Cathedral, which he thought was going to be front and center with all of the architecture clearly delineated, and you could tell which part had been done in 1230 or whatever, was in the background of this crappy looking tree covered with poison ivy or something, and a crummy spray going in. There's cows, and the cathedral's in the background. What's more, it's just about to rain, which is very English, but it's dark, and the bishop felt it was gloomy. He said, "When I look at Constable, it always makes me want to call for my raincoat." Actually, he used the word greatcoat, but that's what he meant. Bishop refuses the painting. Constable has to do a new painting, a sunny, cheerful painting, where he cuts back the foliage a bit. See, he cut back the tree a bit, and now there's as much sun on the damn thing as if they were in Rome, and it just looks completely false to England, but the bishop was willing to accept it. That does not look like England. Look at this. That's England. You can imagine Constable battling here. You know what the bishop really wanted. Constable agreed to cut the tree back, show a little more, and bathe everything in sunlight. Yeah, it's funny, but he can't marry Maria. Finally, somebody dies, Constable inherits some money, and he's able to. There's that dog again. This might have been the one that they turned into the little fisherman or something like that. So he's painting these stormy scenes of guys working. You can see the lock here. You see how high up the boat is? And this guy is closing the left-hand side of the bathtub. And then they're going to drain the water out and lower it down to the next level. You see it's like 6 feet between the upper part of the river and the lower part. High tech. He does cloud studies with all sorts of atmospheric observations. These are just by themselves. They aren't close-ups of paintings. All sorts of notes about what kind of clouds. They had recently started naming different kinds of clouds. Okay, anecdote number 3, called View of Dedham. You can see the cathedral way in the distance there. Does anybody know what's going on in the foreground, the bottom third of the painting? Well, everybody who looked at it in those days did. So somebody managed to get Mr. Peter Godfrey of Old Hall, East Bergholt, Lord of the Manor and Squire, to pay for a Constable painting. His daughter, Philadelphia, was about to marry in 1814. And you can picture it because Constable is direct contemporary of Jane Austen. So having seen the movies, you can picture the whole thing. What kind of blowhards these people were. The lord of the manor. Constable gets the job. Since she is going to be moving to London, they say, paint a picture from her bedroom window of what she used to see when she looked out at the Stour Valley, that she can have there. He very seriously went to the bedroom, made all sorts of sketches, worked for 7 weeks, worked outside in the plein air. Okay, what she saw, now this is his farming country, what she saw from her window, and he faithfully put it in, were men digging at the manure pit right outside her window. This has been established. They hadn't expected that a third of the painting was going to be cow shit, you know? Again, no good. It would be funny, except he's getting angrier and angrier and more frustrated. Here's a little bit better color on it. Slides vary, you know. And there's that dog. Okay. This is one of the studies for the White Horse, which he finally decided was too gloomy. But that's what he really wanted to paint. Who would have understood him? As I said before, the Chinese. They'd been painting this stuff since the 1100s. Pictures of nature, the Taoists, that you contemplated. But he wasn't Chinese. And you see this is 1930. It's an industrial scene outside of one of the Ford plants. We have to remember that to them, his canals looked about as picturesque as this scene looks to us now. It was just the everyday world. Willie Lott's cottage, the dog coming out to meet him. The studies are very impressionistic. In fact, they can sell the studies now because people think that that's actually what he wanted to do, but it wasn't. It was just the beginning. The White Horse again. Somebody dies, he marries her, and then 3 years after he marries her, he discovers she has tuberculosis, which is a death sentence then. They're only together for another 7 years. She manages to have a whole bunch of children before she dies. And he is so bitter and so angry. The 7 years they were separated were the 7 healthy years. Monet was a very bitter and angry man. He didn't make any money till he was in his 50s. So was Constable. It's tough being an avant-garde martyr. Now this. Even today, this picture is so revoltingly ordinary, it still retains some power to shock. This is the story. Joe, still pause it for a moment.